Greetings, Changemakers. Back to the Environmental Changemaker series brought to you by Environmental Scouts. In a few minutes, you'll hear from our very special guest, Kelly Rourke, Executive Director of Pollinator Partnership. I'm Dr. Adrianna Glazener, co-founder of Environmental Scouts. We continued this year, since we last saw you, working to amplify the voices of real-life changemakers, individuals and nonprofits in our community and around the world. So please like this video and subscribe below. You can also follow Environmental Scouts on social media, on Facebook at Environmental Scouts or Instagram at EnviroScoutsLA. Joining me now is Environmental Scouts co-founder, Brooke, whose vision for our community and our planet is really the reason that we're here. So please go back and check out our previous episodes from last year if you get a chance to hear more about this young lady's origin story. And by the way, that superhero analogy is no accident. As one of her teachers, I get to say that. So, okay, Brooke, you know I like team players and hard workers, right? And who better to represent the idea that small things have a huge impact than bees? Brooke, what do you think kids your age need to know about bees?
Well, a lot of people, when they think of bees, they think of these like little scary insects that can sting you. And I've been stung on bees on multiple occasions, and I don't think they're bad just because they sting. It's just their defense mechanism. And a few years ago in third grade, my school had a beehive that was like the bees had made a beehive on school campus. And this is a great learning opportunity. They could have said, oh no, don't exterminate the hive. You could have just relocated. But they hired an exterminator to kill all the bees. And it's like, I understand a little bit more for people who have allergies for bees, but bees are so important. They pollinate 75% of all food we eat. And it's like all bees, not just honeybees. People forget about native bees. Native bees are also dying out, and we kind of just forget about them.
It sounds like you think that a little bit of education could have really changed that situation at your school. Does that sound right?
Yes.
Absolutely. Do you have any, let's see, Brooke, I know you had a couple of sort of, well, for me, traumatic stories about bees, but for you, you're so brave and adaptable and flexible and wonderful. Do you have any like really awesome stories about pollinators or any great experiences that you can think of that kind of demonstrate how bees have helped our planet?
Mm-hmm. Well, like pollinators are also, it's not just bees, it's also butterflies and birds. But I've always really liked bees, and I thought that they were so helpful. And in our garden, we have a garden in our backyard. To see them moving from plant to plant, we know that the garden would not be alive without them.
Oh, that's amazing. So I love that you're able to enjoy them in your backyard. Well, I guess, enough from us bee amateurs. Let's hear from the pollinator expert. So without further ado, Environmental Scouts would like to welcome Kelly Rourke, who, like I said before, is the Executive Director of Pollinator Partnership. And she is here to educate Brooke and I, and hopefully our audience, just to help us become protectors and defenders of these wonderful insects and other animals that we so greatly depend on. Kelly, welcome.
Thank you so much, Adrianna and Brooke. It's great to be here with you today.
Thanks for being here.
So I'm really, really pleased to be able to talk with Environmental Scouts in the Changemakers series and talk to you about a bit of Pollinator 101. So we're going to cover quite a few things, introductory things about pollinators, but I did want to mention that my email and our website, pollinator.org, are here on the slide, and there's tons of more information. If you're intrigued today by the things that you learn, definitely go to the website and you can learn a lot more. We'll go to the next slide, please. Okay, so first I want to tell you a little bit about Pollinator Partnership, which is the nonprofit organization that I run. Pollinator Partnership is a 501c3 nonprofit, and our goal is to protect pollinators and their habitat through collaboration, research, education, habitat creation, and policy. And we do this with partnership, which is, in our name, it is one of our key priorities. And so today I'm going to talk to you about a few things, a handful of things rather. What is pollination? Why is pollination important? Who are the pollinators? What pollinators need? And how to help and get involved. So first, starting out with what is pollination. So it sounds like Brooke has a great understanding of what pollination is by observing pollinators in her backyard. But for those of you that may not know, pollination is basically the movement of pollen from one part of a flower to another to aid in reproduction of a plant. Now, this can happen through wind pollination, through water, or through animal vectors, which are the pollinators that we're going to be talking about today. So as Brooke was also mentioning, the pollinators and bees and other birds, bats, butterflies, etc., are so important for human life as well as the ecosystem and planetary health because they provide a great bounty through their pollination services. So they provide a lot of the food we eat, actually 1/3 of the food we eat, a lot of other natural materials, as well as just supporting ecosystem health. So next, who are the pollinators? So this is a great depiction of the great diversity of pollinators that are out there throughout the world. We've got bats, we've got birds, butterflies, beetles, flies, lots of different bees. And we actually can also see sometimes small mammals and rodents and even reptiles that can pollinate. So the most common pollinator is the honeybee here in the United States and really throughout the world as well. So the pollinators that are most integral to our agricultural system are called Apis mellifera. That's their scientific name, and they're the European honeybee. So that's what you're seeing here. We also have over 4,000 native species of native bees in North America. There's 20,000 species worldwide, about 4,000 in North America. In California, where myself and I know Brooke is located, there's about 1,600 species of native bees. So this shows, this is the poster that Pollinator Partnership did a few years ago, showing the great diversity of bees, some metallic and shiny, some with hair, some without, some large, some small. So there's a great diversity out there that we can appreciate. And this, I love this image because it shows, again, this diversity. So we have here the smallest bee, which is the fairy bee, and one of the largest, which is the xylocopa, which is the carpenter bee, just staring each other down. So I love this image. So one of the other diversities about bees, which is not just in how they look, it's actually how they live. So this illustration shows how bees nest. So how they raise their young, how they lay their eggs, and then their eggs become adults. So we have some bees that are like carpenter bees, for example, that will nest in the wood. And this will be in perhaps, a dried up stump, or actually an active tree, or maybe a pithy stem. And they'll actually drill holes into wood and actually lay their eggs in a series of cavities. We also have, if you can go back, we actually also have some bees that nest in the ground. So this is the lower left portion. You can see this is as an example of a miner bee. So you can think of a miner as digging in the ground, and they lay a series of a network of basically brood or their babies that grow in the ground. On the right-hand side, we actually have an example of a leafcutter bee, and they actually use small pieces of leaves or plant vegetation to lay their eggs in either pithy stems or woods, or actually you can make native bee houses if you've ever tried that. It's really fun. And this is so that when their brood hatches, they actually have something to eat. And I love this poster. This is another one that Pollinator Partnership did. This was actually last year's poster. And it shows the other ecosystem services in addition to pollination that pollinators provide to us here on planet Earth. So in these honeycomb graphics, you can see that pollinators and their habitat are helping with nutrient cycling. They support biodiversity. So they provide resources for wildlife. So for example, we might not to think about pollinators wanting to get eaten, but it is part of the web of life. And sometimes bird species may eat caterpillars, and it actually fuels the greater ecosystem, as well as producing wild vegetation that may produce berries or other fruits that things like even bears eat. So it's all connected. They also provide, in addition to food security for humans, they provide raw materials, so like cotton or different plants that produce dyes. And then they also can provide beautiful places for us to recreate as well. So I know many of us love hiking and seeing beautiful wildflowers, so we can thank pollinators for that as well. Okay, so now we, I think, have a good understanding of what pollinators are, what they do, why they're important. So now I want to talk about why they need our help. So unfortunately, you've probably heard about the decline of bees and other pollinators. And this is due to really 4 things that are working together against these critical species. So we have parasites and disease. You can see this is an example of a varroa mite, which is a pest that attacks honeybees and makes them unable to live. We have climate change, which is, obviously a really critical environmental issue right now. We have the misuse of pesticides, which can be both in agricultural settings as well as in home gardens. So we want to reduce or eliminate the use of pesticides, and habitat loss as well due to agricultural intensification or development. So basically, one of the most important things is pollinators need habitat to live and to eat. So now talking about a little more specifically about what bees need. Honeybees, for example, they need forage, which is their food. So they need pollen and nectar, which is what they're going after in plants. And they need this throughout the growing season when they're active. We also need pesticide-free areas, which I mentioned. And then for native bees, they need those above things, but they also need native plants, because native plants are evolved to support native pollinators. And they also need habitat connectivity. So this means we don't just want one patch of habitat, we want lots of patches of habitat all over. And they also need nesting sites. So honeybees live in a colony that we put together for them. I'm sure you've seen the beehive boxes, but native bees nest in natural areas. So we need to provide those as well. And this is just a really cool depiction of some of these nesting sites, which we talked about. So some can be man-made. You can help support them by making native bee condos or houses, or just by allowing bare ground, or allowing maybe in your garden at the end of the year, allowing some of those dried up pithy stems to remain around for a little bit so that native bees may be able to nest in them. So when we talk about pollinator forage or pollinator food, there's a few things that you want to plan for and look for if you're creating a garden or a habitat area. So again, we mentioned native plants. In some areas, non-native, non-invasive plants can be good too, but mainly you're looking for continuous bloom. So you want plants that bloom in the early spring and then all the way through the fall. And in some areas like California, if you're lucky enough to not have a snowy winter, you actually can have some plants through the winter too. You want patches of the same flowers so that bees don't have to travel too far and expend too much energy to get from one flower to the next. And again, no insecticides or pesticides if possible. And you want to do a mix of different types of plants, like some more woody type shrubs or trees, perennial plants, and grasses. So now, lastly, you want to talk about how you can get involved in pollinator conservation. So there's a lot of information here, but just some takeaways. And again, going to pollinator.org, you can find more information. But we want to definitely use native plants when you're selecting plants for your garden and seeds. Milkweed is also a really great plant to include if you are in the monarch migratory pathway. Milkweed is the main host plant. It is the host plant for the monarch caterpillars. And you want to choose blooms throughout the season, variety of colors and shapes, and native grasses and sedges as well. I want to point you to a couple resources that we have available. So pollinator.org has some planting guides where you can actually put in your zip code and come up with a list of different plants that are native to your area. And then on the next slide, we have a newer resource, which is a little bit more simple, a little bit easier to digest, where you can see specific plant lists for your area, 3 for each season. And with this, it actually gives you steps 1, 2, 3, 4 on how to select plants, plant your garden, and maintain your garden. So another great way to participate and engage and raise awareness about pollinator conservation is through participating in National Pollinator Week. So this is the 3rd week of June each year. Great way to have fun, get involved, and just showcase the great importance of pollinators and why we need to work to protect them. Another thing I definitely want you kids to learn about is Be Smart School Garden Kit. So this is actually a kit that comes with seeds and a 10 lesson plan curriculum for teachers and educators, as well as some other fun activities to learn about pollinators, where your food comes from, and how to start a garden. We also have tons of other information on our website, pollinator.org. We actually, during the COVID-19 pandemic, came up with a new website called Keep Going, Keep Growing. And this has lots of different at-home activities for kids that students and parents can do together. Again, lots of other information. What Brooke was talking about earlier, we have a brochure called No Fear of Stings. So this is trying to get people to not fear bees and to celebrate them, and lots of other information on pollinator.org as well. And that's all I have. So happy to chat with Brooke and Adrianna now about anything else pollinator related. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I wanted to play a quick game of true or false, because I was thinking about 2 things that my own mom, I think out of protection for me when I was little, a couple of things that she told me. So I'm going to tell you what she used to tell me about bees and butterflies, and then you can tell me true or false. So the first thing is, she said when they're walking around on the ground and not really flying about, that they're probably sick. Is that true or is that false?
I think that's probably false, although it could be true in some scenarios. But I think typically when bees are walking around on the ground, they're usually looking for water. So one thing that not many people know is that honeybees in particular actually need water in addition to their food from flowers. So oftentimes they'll kind of be looking around for water on the ground. I don't think it necessarily means they're sick.
Okay, so note to mom, do not try to put sick bees out of their misery. Got it. Second question, true or false? This is from mom. She said that so Brooke and I both happen to live in the monarch flight path. And I know I've talked to Brooke, we both have milkweed that springs up in our gardens. And my mom told me, so grandma said, that it should be cut back in the winter to encourage the monarchs to continue on their path. True or false?
True.
Oh,
So mom had this one. So it's a little complicated though. So there's different types of milkweed. So The native milkweed that we have here in California, and really in the central migration as well, because there's two separate populations, the native milkweed will actually die back and senesce during the winter so that it won't affect the monarch's migration. But there's a common type of milkweed here called Asclepias curassavica, that's tropical milkweed, that's not native. It's used a lot in California, and it's a great nectar source. Monarchs love it, but it actually will stay blooming all year round and stay green all year round, which can disrupt their migration. So that type you definitely want to cut back during the winter.
Good. I'm going to have to figure out what type I have. It has orange flowers. Does that help?
There's a couple orange ones, but it could be tropical.
Awesome. And I'll check out the resource online as well to figure out what I need to plant in my garden. Brooke, do you want to tell us a little bit more about your garden, or do you have any questions for Kelly that you thought of during the presentation?
Oh, yes, I do have a few questions. Like, I know that many people, like I see, like all my neighbors, have like these gardens and they have all these flowers. And a lot of people use like pesticides and insecticides on their gardens to keep like all the bugs from eating it away. And many people don't know. So are there any that aren't like, are there pesticides? Are there eco-friendly ways to keep the insects off?
Yeah, that's a great question. So unfortunately, there's not a ton of different ways to combat pests. So one thing that I like to say at the beginning is if it's not totally ruining your garden, just allow for some pests to be there. You kind of have to get a little bit comfortable with things not looking perfect. So that's kind of the first thing I would say. But there are a lot of actually new bio control methods coming out. So you can encourage actually natural enemies of pests. So that means other insects that might eat those pests that you don't want in your garden. So actually, I know wasps can be scary sometimes, but there's some wasp species that'll be really good at getting those Japanese beetles and those aphids and other pests that might munch on your garden. And then also ladybugs are great. So there's certain other ways you can encourage those types of natural enemies. And actually for things like milkweed we're talking about, there's a milkweed aphid and milkweed beetles that will get on the milkweed. And there's actually ways of using things like either white vinegar or dish soap. Actually, you can spray that on and it will actually deter the aphids, or even just spraying with water, doing some hand removal of the aphids can work too. So depending on the size of your garden, it might not be totally practical, but if you've got small patches, you can probably get it just on your own manually.
I also know the snails been eating the milkweed. It's driving me insane. So I just kind of go through every morning and kind of clean them out myself because they've already managed to kill one milkweed plant and we weren't looking. But I was also doing some research earlier, and I know that we have a local gardening center. It's called Armstrong. They actually sell products that include neonicotinoids and glyphosate. So it's not. They also have one that's spinosad, which is like to control the insects. And luckily, though, in 2023, places like Lowe's and Home Depot won't be able to sell those things anymore, but people will still be able to use it for agricultural uses. But and many people aren't aware that it's bad for them, though. So hopefully we can accomplish educating some people about the pesticides.
Yeah.
Brooke, if I may for just a second, you had such a good idea there. I wanted to jump in and ask another question. I think it's related. So, Brooke and I go to the same school, and we were really interested in looking at the resources that you offered and the school garden kits. But I wanted to connect that to the idea of the pesticides and the herbicides that we know our school district still uses. Are we endangering the bees more by planting native plants on our school campus to attract them, knowing that those native plants out of our control could be sprayed with pesticides or herbicides?
Yeah.
How should we go about that advocacy? Like, which comes first, kind of, the chicken or the egg?
That is a really, really good question. I still think that there's going to be, so in conservation, we talk often about a net positive. And I think there's still a net positive of getting those native plants out there. And I think by getting those native plants out there and maybe working with maintenance and facility staff to understand how to identify some of them. Oh, this is milkweed. I know it's got weed in the name, but it's actually something we want around. I think that's going to be really important, just talking and communicating and getting people to understand that we need these things around. So I think, there is a bit of a risk, certainly, but the more we educate and communicate with each other, I think that's gonna create the most benefit.
That's great. Brooke, I think we can do that, because I think the idea of a net positive is such a great point, rather than, well, we can't because they're just going to spray everything. Maybe we could use this as an opportunity to educate the maintenance staff and say, hey, don't touch our plants. And here's why. And then maybe that is something that can trickle down to maintenance as a whole.
Right.
I'm excited. That's awesome. Brooke, did you have any other questions for Kelly?
No.
You're good. I have one more just because I can't stop. Brooke, you also mentioned 2023 and some of the laws, regarding pesticides and herbicides. Kelly, do you know of any current laws that protect pollinators specifically? Just thinking about Brooke's story about the hive, it makes me sad and angry that that's allowed. And I'm just wondering if there's any states or anything you know of where pollinators are specifically protected against acts like that.
Yeah, good question. So there's a few things to mention there. So the EPA does regulate all pesticides that are approved for use in the United States. Mm-hmm. And there's something called bee labeling, bee safe labeling. So each pesticide will have bee warnings if they can negatively hurt pollinators. So, and in particular, honeybees, because most of these are agricultural use products. So there's a lot of regulations, but not rules for prohibition on a lot of these chemicals. So the European Union actually did a moratorium, which means they didn't allow the use of neonicotinoids for a 3-year span. And it was a little disappointing, honestly, to follow, because what happened was a lot of agricultural producers just started using other chemicals like chlorpyrifos, which can be just as bad for pollinators. So instead of just totally removing pesticides from the market or from the scene in agriculture, we need to, I think, also promote better use of chemicals, because in a lot of cases they're going to be used. 97% of agriculture in the United States is not organic, meaning they do use some sort of chemical. So I think just as important, we need to educate farmers and land managers, even like, your school faculty people, on the best use if they have to use them. But there's also programs like in the state of California, there's a Beware program, which is has different laws and safeguards for beekeepers that may have their hives placed near agricultural lands. And they say that agricultural producers or pesticide applicators must notify beekeepers if they're going to have a spraying event, so that the beekeepers can then move their bees ahead of time and keep them safe. So there are certain things in place, but again, I think just education and awareness is absolutely number one priority.
Yeah, and no laws governing extermination, like if a school calls and says, come get this hive, nothing like that. Well, we should get a number, like a phone number of a local beekeeper ready, and just give it to the school office, Brooke, so that if it happens again, they're like ready to go and they don't have to look around.
That is a great idea. And we actually have a program that connects beekeepers with people that need safe relocation. So that's an awesome idea. I love that.
We can find that on your website as well.
Yes, Bee Rescuers is what it's called.
Okay, so we've got Bee Rescuers, Be Safe, and Beware. There's the pun opportunities are endless. Kelly, thank you so much. We're going to go ahead and wrap it up now, but we do want our audience to visit your website and to go on your socials on Facebook and Instagram. It's so important that your organization continues to get the support you need to do this great education and advocacy work. So Facebook, you can find Pollinator Partnership at the Pollinator Partnership, on Instagram at Pollinator Partnership, and on Twitter at Pollinators. And then, of course, as we mentioned, the website is Pollinator, singular, correct? Pollinator.org. Yeah.
Correct.
All right, Kelly, thank you so much. And Brooke, thanks again. I will see you soon, Brooke, for our next episode. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.